worried that you might be the cool kid? You wear the latest fashions on top of all the trends. Or have you ever worried you were too much in the mainstream? Always so generic, more normal than your friends. Well, we've devised a test to put to rest your fears. There's no need to panic if you lend us your ears. Tonight you can't sleep easy after all that you've heard. Cause if you like the show, then you're probably a nerd. Oh, Canon, it's Canon, it's all. Tyler, Phil, and Boris. Oh, Canon, it's Canon, it's all in Canon.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the It's Canon podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things comics, the podcast where we talk about all things toys, the podcast where we talk all things pop culture, and so much more. That's right, we are back from our summer vacation, somewhat forced vacation, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. We're your hosts. I'm Boris, and as always, I am joined by Phil.
Howdy, everybody. Good to be back in the seat. You know what I'm saying? I'm not really typing away at work. Having the mic.
It feels great, Phil. It feels great. It feels great to be back. How are you, Phil?
I'm doing fantastic. You know, it's been a busy summer, but feeling good, enjoying the weather, enjoying Southern Ontario. How about yourself?
Everything is going really well, man. Everything is going really well. Tons of change happening. If you are watching live, and remember, you can watch the show live each and every single week on YouTube, on X, on Facebook, and so much more. And even Twitch. So thank you if you're watching live. And you should watch live because, well, you get the full experience if you're watching on YouTube. That's awesome, too. And if you're listening in podcast form, well, you're listening a little later than usual because this is the premiere episode of A Plus Productions Entertainment Branch. And it's the It's Canon podcast, A Plus Production. What is A Plus Production? Well, it's a new podcast network started from a lot of creative Canadian minds, and that's where the A Plus comes from. It's a play on A because we're fantastic, and A because we're Canadian. And this is the premiere episode of A Plus Productions outside of the Get to Know Your Host. But we did it, Phil. We're doing our own thing, and this is where you can catch, well, A Plus Entertainment, BAM Sports and Entertainment. You can even listen to the new wrestling show that's going to be premiering next week. That's right. In 1 week's time, the new wrestling show is going to be premiering, and you're going to be listening to a lot of familiar voices on that network. So, Phil, there you go. At A Plus Productions. We did it.
We did it. I didn't know what we were doing, but we did something. And that's
exactly
credit to Boris, because Boris kind of handles the business end of this venture. So he has to organize it and do all the legwork, and I really do appreciate that, my friend. You know, I just get the pleasure of going out and buying a mic.
And buying the fancy ass camera, which we were talking about offline. And we have an awesome guest. We're not going to take too much dilly-dallying. We're not going to take too much time going back and forth about our life, because I really wanted to talk about A Plus Entertainment. But we do have a very special guest, a pop culture expert with a very cool project in mind. And Phil, I'm you know what? I got to thank Tyler for bringing us together. Yep. Tyler, I know you don't listen, but thank you so much.
One day he'll be back, we swear.
Exactly. One day he'll be back. And again, the chat is open. If you do have any questions, comments, even concerns about anything we say, go ahead and put it in the chat. We're going to be monitoring that as always. Phil, I think we should just get right to things.
Yeah. Roll out the red carpet.
All right.
For them, please.
Yeah, let's roll out the red carpet for this next guest. It's awesome anytime we have a guest, because I just love how we always veer from what we're actually supposed to be talking about and promoting. I think, the 2-hour conversation we have with Jim Zub, the almost 3-hour conversation we had with Matt Elfring, the 2-hour conversation we had with Fearless Fred, and this next guest, I feel like in the 5 minutes that we were talking before we went live, it's going to be a heck of a show. This man is an award-winning writer, director, producer, and when you think pop culture, this man knows it. He has an encyclopedia knowledge of pop culture. He's also a founding partner of Definitive Films, a Canadian company that Well, it's known for its bespoke documentaries and utilizing their unique integrated systems and workflows to help other filmmakers achieve the best possible version of their own films. He's also worked on a lot of projects that, well, some of our listeners are very well familiar of, including Dark Side of the Ring and Tales of the Territories. So that's how we're bringing it all together in this It's Canon world. And he has a very neat project, which we're going to be talking about. It is a TMNT documentary, Evolution, Mutation, and Reboot. The Kickstarter is going to be starting later this month. He is Randall Lobb. Randall, welcome to the show.
Guys, I'm here. I made it.
Yeah, you made it. Thank God you're still here. I thought you would have ran away after that.
The nail that you put in my chair caught my pants and I couldn't go anywhere. I don't know how you did that.
Love it.
You said you're in Southern Ontario, so you're close. We're close to each other right now, aren't we?
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure.
I'm 3 hours west of you guys, right on Lake Huron. Beautiful Goderich, Ontario, a small town in the middle of here, in the middle of nowhere, honestly.
Yeah,
Goderich, Ontario. I feel like you're the third person I know from Goderich, Ontario, and the other two people know each other. So there's Danny Granger Art. He's known for all of his.
That I taught Danny Granger in high school. I was his high school teacher.
Exactly, exactly. I do know that. So that's a small world. I love it. He's for sure listening to this at some point. We actually work on a podcast together, the Sheriff Podcast.
You know, I think I might be the first person who called him Granny Danger. I'm going to go and say that. I'm going to go on record as saying that. Danny, if you're listening, can you verify if that's true? Let us know. Let us know in the comments. We're not going to read them because comments are scary, but let us know.
Exactly. All right. So, pop culture. What does pop culture mean to you, Randall? I know that, you're very studious, but to you, what does pop culture mean?
Let me settle back. Let me just take a moment. The thing about pop culture is generationally, for me, it's not the same as it is for younger people, and for a very interesting reason. As you can see, I'm a graybeard. I'm like Gandalf, but without any magic or abilities, except the fluke of when I was born meant that there was an aspect of pop culture that it was something you could never get enough of. You couldn't get what you wanted, right? Let's say the first thing you maybe loved, and this is probably common to most people, you would see some cartoon like Merry Melodies or the Flintstones or that amazing Spider-Man show, if you remember the crazy one with the amazing soundtrack, that jazz soundtrack. Mm-hmm. Those shows would be on and you wouldn't know where they came from, why they were on or not on. You know what I mean? There was no information around any of the things that were entertaining or interesting or cool to a kid when I was growing up. So pop culture to me was something that I had to burn calories to get. The example I've given in other podcasts when people interview me, funny thing that they would often ask is, if you've seen us work or if you've seen our films, you would notice that we go deep. We always say that we do this thing called the definitive deep dive. And part of that definitive deep dive is sort of manifesting the effect of something that we had to do as kids at a certain age. So it's David Bowie that would be kind of an example. If I was in grade 4 and I was at a friend's house and his older brother had the album Diamond Dogs, this is an exact situation. Mm-hmm. And if you know what Diamond Dogs looks like, it's Bowie as a dog with two female dog human hybrids there. And it's creepy, or it struck me as creepy. And my buddy's older brother saw that I was intrigued and freaked out and scared. And I loved music and wanted to listen to whatever was happening that older kids had. And he was telling me stuff about David Bowie and Diamond Dogs. And then he played the album. And the first song is really scary. And it's sound effects. And it's eerie. And that album was meant to be for a stage play that was going to be done, a play version of 1984. So as it's playing, I mean, imagine this. There's no such thing in your mind as a David Bowie. You hear that music, and then you have this thing, a David Bowie. And what is it? What does it mean? Where is it? Where do you see it? What is a Diamond Dog? Like, it's all questions. So as a kid, that happens again and again and again and again. And like some kids, sometimes you just go, that was a thing that was on, I watched it, right? Flintstones or whatever. But sometimes you'd be like, I don't know anything about David Bowie and I have to know. And the other thing that hit me that way might have been Kiss. You see your first Kiss album, Dressed to Kill, if you know that black and white cover, and they're standing there in those business suits. Like, it's crazy. And so for me, pop culture was a series of questions that had no answers that would happen in a quick way or an easy way. I had to burn so many calories to get you couldn't get an album. You couldn't get, behind me, I have a bunch of Conan stuff. I would see the Conan the Barbarian Lancers. You talk to Zub, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You get that 5-hour conversation with Jim Zub about Dungeons and Dragons and Conan. You know, Zub will have the same story as me or anyone. You saw a Conan somewhere and you're like, that's a Frazetta painting. Your hair stands on end and you don't know who made that? What is that? Where did it come from? It's all questions. So starting from that place, pop culture is like an onion, and just peel and peel and peel and dig and go deeper. And we made a little back and forth earlier, a joke. I mentioned Mad Dog Vachon. When you see that old wrestling from the old days, you don't know that it's a character. You just know that guy's like that. And think how hard back then, how hard it is to get information about anything. So the obsession gets built out of the lack of amount of material. You just become crazy. Like, and I could name every single thing I was obsessed with as a kid because they're so relevant and they're so meaningful. And it was so hard to get in a small town in the middle of nowhere. And you guys know, you're from here. We get it sometimes early, thanks to England and our ties to England, and sometimes super late. So it's tricky. You're in this place where you never have enough. You can never get what you want, but that's making it more special in a way, right? It really makes it important and valuable, and you really, really treasure the things you get. Like all our stuff probably in our rooms is involved in the feeling of being a little kid and getting something and treasuring it. So for me, pop culture was never throwaway until way later. It was something that I fought for and saved up for and worked so hard to care about. Rather, didn't have to work hard to care about, but to get it and take care of it.
Yeah, it's like when I was a kid, because I'm older
what's very
than
interesting
Boris.
though is like,
so I'm just going to quickly say we had things like Starlog magazine and heavy metal, and those were like the things that you went to the corner store or the variety store and you grabbed, and they were your Bible for a month. You ripped them page to page, and other kids were putting up pictures of cars and things like that. And here I was figuring out artists and who Geiger was. And how do I get my parents to rent a VCR so I can see Alien? You know what I mean? Like, and my parents were just like, well, it's a movie, so it's for kids.
I don't know if anyone has an Alien story like mine. I watched Alien from a tree behind the drive-in movie in our town. Like,
oh my goodness.
So far away, it was like a postage stamp, no sound. And I was scared. Like, I'm in a tree to see over everything and looking down into the drive-in, and would have given my left foot to be in there and watch that movie.
Yeah. And back then you could get into an R-rated movie if you had an adult that would take you.
Yeah. Or
we
a
would
trunk.
Just look at it. Yeah. And we used to love being able to get in, but that was the key, right? It's so much of the pop culture back then, just like you say. I remember scrounging around to find a book called Skywalking, which was all about George Lucas. And here I am in grade 4. And my friend's father is like, are you sure you want to buy this book? It's 800 pages. And I'm like, I want to read it cover to cover. I just have to know more about George Lucas. Like, what other movies does he do? How do you remember, I get my hands on them?
Do you remember when that book, A Splinter in the Mind's Eye, came out after Star Wars, the Alan Dean Foster book? And I remember seeing that, and that's one of the first times I can remember thinking, oh, like, you know what I mean? Yeah. Oh, they're adding on. Like, you get that excitement. It's like a comic. They're adding to it. It's not like just Star Wars and done. Like, something else is happening. I think that was the second Star Wars thing.
Yeah, and that was the thing with Star Wars as a kid. You know, I'm a little bit younger
You are
yeah,
younger.
than you are. But I'm older than Boris. But it was back in the day. You got to see Star Wars maybe once, if you're lucky, twice on the big screen. And then the rest of the time you're going to the playground and play acting what you remembered.
Yeah.
You know, with the action figures, we're in real life. We were a bunch of lunatics running around the playground pretending to be Luke Skywalker and who's going to be Vader and all of this stuff, right? And especially when Empire and Return hit. It was unbelievable. It was different times back then.
Exactly. I was born after the original trilogy came out. And one of the things about me is that, like, I know a lot of pop culture mainly because of my older brother. My older brother he took me under his wing and he geeked me out and he showed me pop culture. So I kind of have this, like, interesting, like, connection to pop culture in the sense of I understand how it was back then. And then obviously I grew up in a generation where pop culture was just a lot more accessible.
Yeah.
And I find that one of the things that I always loved was like you were saying, not everything was as accessible. You had to really dig, you had to search. Like, you ask people right now, or someone asks me, what's the toy that you want? Obviously it's the G.I. Joe platform, right? Like everyone wants that toy. And I find like that's my holy grail of toys. It's impossible to find. It's impossible to get. But if I'm one day, I've said it, I will buy that toy. She will be mine. Oh yes, she will be mine. Yeah, the USS
you'll
flag.
like this. You'll like this, Boris. We were at do you know PowerCon conferences? Like it was Val Staples had a He-Man conference, and it was in Torrance, California, and we were there showing Power of Grayskull, one of our docs, and which was an insane story about that screening. But there was a guy from Colombia there who had flown in to get the Grayskull play set, the full Grayskull. I don't know I knew what he paid for it. It was in the thousands, and he flew there to get it from Colombia. And it was so meaningful. And I think we probably have footage of this somewhere, but he was dang near in tears that he finally had this. So people get it. People in other countries that really like American and North American or British pop culture, and you can't get it all the time. Even young people can get that drive too. But in the old days, dude, it was a grind. You had to hang out with some unsavory older brothers, not even like your nice older brother. You hang out with some gnarly dudes. If you want to listen to a Deep Purple album, you had to hang out with some real scary characters.
Oh heck, I had one comic book store in my town, and in grade 8 I became fascinated with Sandman, and it was just launching, and that was an 18+ mature comic, and I had to broker deals with two guys behind the counter in order for them to look the other way while I left double the amount of cash to pick up the book. It was just crazy time.
That's exactly it, right?
Yeah.
And to put this in terms of like some of our wrestling fans who are listening, right? It's like being a wrestling fan back in the tape trading days, where somehow you would find someone with a New Japan wrestling tape or a ECW tape, and that's literally the only way. You would go and these mailing lists, and you guys would trade based off of what they have, and it was like, it was crazy, right? Or being an anime fan in the 90s. Or Japanimation, as we used to call it, right? Yeah. It was just like one of those things where I remember there was a store here in Mississauga called the Comic Den, and they rented for 50 cents things called fan subs, which was essentially VHS recorded tapes, which people like who knew the language literally subbed it themselves, because that way we would all be able to understand it. And that's how I was able, and my brother were able to watch so many shows, quote unquote, keep up to date with things like Dragon Ball and all of those as they were happening. Like it was just, it was a battle back then.
And think about it this way, that culture had been happening for ages. Like it happened in the New York punk days with Punk Magazine. It happened in the early skateboard culture, right? The California thrash culture, trading tapes and stuff. And it happened even earlier. You think about when white kids wanted to listen to black music in the 50s. Like my dad was a cool dude. He played in a band and he wanted some really good music that would have been considered in old-fashioned whitey culture, kind of rebellious and hard to get, and you got to trade for it. Rolling Stones are the Rolling Stones because they had access to black albums that were hard to get. So that idea has been around for a long time, that there's something you want, is low population, and you're going to go out of your way to get it. So you value it and it's meaningful. Not to say that having tons of stuff now is bad. It just means it's a different skill. The skill is filtering, right? Now it's about what don't you want to pay attention to. You got to make a reverse decision in a way.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And then this brings me to kind of the whole point where it's, pop culture. Right now, a lot of people have this definition of pop culture as something that's quote unquote geeky or cool, or as the name says, popular, which this is the reason why I kind of asked you, what do you think pop culture actually is? Like, for me, it's, just the love of something, is being part of a fandom, and you and that fandom finding out everything you can, obsessing over that topic as much as you humanly can. That, to me, is what pop culture is.
Yeah, it's just a way of talking about the things that entertain us and distract us from the mundanity of life. Like, not to say that life is mundane, right? I'm a happy guy. I have a happy marriage. I have kids. Like, I have all the things that people would have wished for forever. But once you get those things satisfied, after your needs are met, you're lucky to live in Canada and your needs are met, What are you doing with your life? To me, that's what pop culture is. The stuff that drives you into enjoyment or distracts you from when you're feeling low, you put on a certain album, you read a certain book, whatever. People that love wrestling, they love the culture around wrestling too, right? It's woven out of a lot of pieces and parts. And that idea that all these things are connected into a big web makes them into the culture, right? That's the difference. It's not like somebody likes a wrestling show. They might start there, but then they meet a band and a group of people and a fandom and a whole bunch of stuff that happens. And all of a sudden you got all these connected things that are, moving you through your life and marking your life. And they're your value points, things that give you meaning. It's very important, I think. And I know that I'm guilty a lot of not just analyzing, but thinking about pop culture in an analytical way. I used to teach school, and when I was teaching, I would try to make people excited about the information in that way. Like, it's exciting because it's information that is cool, like that it's fun inherently, right? It's inherently fun to watch Star Wars in 1977 or in 2024. But what makes it more fun is the more you know, the more you have to sort of grab onto when you're watching. It gets better and better and better the more you dive deep into all the different aspects. Like, for example, you reading Skywalking, George Lucas, and that invests a movie with a whole new layer of meaning. And that's how I got into it in that way, is figuring out, Stan Lee. Oh, I get it. Jack Kirby. Oh, and you start to see all this world behind whatever is presented. That world becomes very meaningful. Starlog, Cinefantastique, or whatever magazine you liked at the time, Famous Monsters, Fangoria, you could go down the road.
Oh, yeah.
And these magazines start showing you about this big world behind that show. Some people liked Planet of the Apes. Fine, they watched it. They're done. Some people went and got the Planet of the Apes magazines. Some people had to get the book, Planet of the Apes. Some people went and got the Pierre Bouy book, the French book, you know what I mean? They go deep. And that was me. I started to feel that big web behind the best, or what I perceived to be the best things. Like, if you liked like a band like Rush, you guys are from Toronto. People who like Rush, they still like Rush. Like, they like the world that Rush has built, or that is around Rush. And that can open you up to Primus and Tool and who knows, Dream Theater. Like, you can go so deep into these things, and that's very rewarding, right? We get the stuff, we get the shirts, we go to the concerts, we compare shows. I worked with a guy in the late 80s who followed Bob Dylan, and he just watched every Bob Dylan show that he could watch, and he collected the bootlegs, and he had them all categorized. And anyway, that to me is the stuff that adds a lot of meaning to life. If cave people in Lascaux are blowing ochre paint on their handprint and then making a wildebeest beside it or an aurochs or whatever. That tells you how important that stuff is, because those caves weren't easy to get into.
Yeah, it's
That's
kind of
exactly
funny.
it.
You mentioned Rush, and where I was buying my magazines was Geddy Lee's variety store, Times Square Discount on Main Street.
What?
Yeah, we'd always go in and ask her, "Hey, Mrs. Lee, how's Geddy?" And she go, "Oh, he's touring the world."
Geddy's mom?
Yeah, she owned a Times Square Discount on Main Street.
That's amazing.
Yeah, she sold magazines, candy, all that kind of stuff. You know, that was.
I would have been in there every day. Just
right.
Believe me, there may be a story unofficial floating around of me throwing up in something in like Alex Lifeson's house.
Love it.
Writing this down.
Don't look in the dishwasher.
You know, we talked about pop. Go ahead, Phil. Are you,
no.
We
just
talked
don't
about
look
pop
in the
culture,
dishwasher.
right? So we talked about pop culture. How does one say, this is what I want to dedicate my life into, and this is what I want to study and contribute to for the rest of my life? How did you make that decision?
You know how, I don't know if you guys know or think about evolution the way I do. So I'll back up. I was going to say, you know how evolution works? It's that you can't fight what you are, you know?
Yep.
Let's say you're a kid and you grow up like me in a town where it's about man shit. What, can we curse on this show?
Oh yeah.
Yo, yeah.
Okay.
Have fun.
Yeah.
Where it's all about man shit. And I say that in probably the toxic masculinity way, right? Like trucks. I grew up with, my dad sold farm machinery and we had snowmobiles, and they were like vehicles that you tinker with and you got to open up and play with the carburetor, whatever, blow an ether into engines. Like it was very man shit sort of life. But I wasn't good at that. Not that I didn't want to be. I just wasn't. I was not skilled. And the less skilled you are, the less people want you to play with all that fun stuff, right? So it would be like me thinking, I'm obviously going to be a truck driver. I'm from a truck driving community. I'm going to deliver vehicles and balers and, you know, hay binds and stuff. I'm just going to work in this culture. But I didn't fit in that culture. So I just automatically liked Spider-Man. I automatically cared about Wolverine. You know, 1975, I'm 10 years old and I see that Wolverine, Hulk 181, and I'm like, okay, that's a Canadian superhero. What? You know? And I was lucky enough, like Boris said, there's an older kid in our town and he had all the X-Men, all the Fantastic Four, and he let me read those comics. He would let me take 10 home. I had to be very careful. And just, it was automatic that I was interested and I couldn't help it. And this is the evolution part. Because of the way my brain worked, I have how would we say this? I have ADHD, and I have that kind of weird pattern thing that people who have ADHD, sometimes you can't focus on anything. Sometimes you can only focus on one thing so deep and you go hard. And I hold patterns
I know that
really
feeling.
well. Yeah, I'm sure you do. We all do. So many of us are either on the autism and Asperger's spectrum, however you want to say it. So many of us who are into this world, we have a lot of the similar attributes. And so those attributes that make it more difficult for us to do some of the other shit that a lot of guys want to do, or you don't feel part of that culture, suddenly you realize, oh, I remember every lyric to every song I listened to. I remember the artists. I remember who wrote these songs. I remember who, you know, produced whatever. Like, you just remember it. And you're building this vision of the world by these pieces. And I couldn't have fought it if I wanted to. Like, it was just the way my brain worked. So if you said to me right now, we're going to talk about World War II. Yep, I can do that. If you said we're going to talk about Vietnam, yep, I can do that. If you said we're going to talk about British music between 1963 and 1983, I can do that. It's not a choice. The idea of going into it as a business started when the internet started. So late 80s, I went to film school, and I came out of film school and unfortunately, I had a terrible head injury. I got hit by a cab at the corner of King and York downtown, and I had amnesia. So I'm a kid that has at the time, growing up, I had a photographic memory. I could remember anything that I read, anything that I had an emotion around. So think about being a pop culture fan, and anything that happens, I have a clear memory. After I had amnesia, I had to sort of rebuild, and I'd been working in production on commercials, and it's not a great life working on commercials in the 80s. I don't even drink alcohol. A lot of people are cokeheads, and it's kind of a rough environment in a way for a person who doesn't drink and doesn't get high. You end up having to be a little bit of a caretaker of the world around you. And so you take on a lot of responsibility, and I'm in the industry taking on a lot of responsibility and not really happy. Then when I hit my head, I thought, there's a thing called post-concussion syndrome. No one knew what it was back then. I had a pretty good case of it, and I couldn't work in production anymore. And I thought, I think the thing I want to do is use the internet and education to focus on pop culture. There was a new initiative at the time. They wanted to teach media literacy, media criticism to kids as what they called the fifth English in the Ontario school system at the time. And I got hired early on because I was, at the time, I don't think there was any other film student anywhere in Ontario applying to Teachers College. And I got in, and my focus was, I'm going to take all of pop culture and turn it into a tool to teach media literacy and critical thinking to young people. That's my bag. And so that's how it began, as I just approached it that way. And then I started getting hired to do it in a way that, it's hard to believe now, but it would be called intellectual property exploitation, IP exploitation now. But back then it would be like, I would help people generate press kits, or you would take a science fiction book and sort of reduce it to a set of ideas that you could use in a screenplay. Like, I did a lot of that kind of developmental writing and thinking around how these things would fit and how the internet would be incorporated into education and entertainment. So very early on, I got in that way. And I came in as a sort of teacher, thinker, teaching other teachers how to get into this stuff, how to use these tools. And my own interests drove me really deep in there. And the turtle thing came after we were working on really some dark subject matter. Canada's military was in Afghanistan for a long time, and we got involved in a documentary by a citizen journalist who was over there. And an unfortunate IED went off at two Buffaloes, two light armored vehicles in front of him. And by coincidence, a kid who was killed in that vehicle was from the same community as us. And the guy that I knew who was in the light armored vehicle didn't realize, and his mother was friends with that kid's mother. It's just a crazy coincidence. His name is Richard Fitoussi, the boy who was in the young man who was in the light armored vehicle as a journalist. And the soldier who passed away was Matthew Dinning from Wingham here. And so that got us involved. We were helping Richard Fitoussi, my partner Mark Hussey, and I, who got together to make music. I'm a music producer at the time, and he's a musician, has got a family band. We said, let's do some of these things that we're doing in music production, things I'm doing in education and the writing I'm doing, and let's apply all these principles to this documentary for Richard Fitoussi, the citizen journalist. So just applying those, we ended up working in these kind of dark subjects, landmines in Cambodia, and a man named Mr. Akira, who was physically hand demining, like pulling them out with shovels and trench knives and stuff, right, and taking the mines apart. And then one day, Isaac Elliott Fisher, 2008, Isaac Elliott Fisher is a young guy, he's 20 years younger than me, and he's a director of photography and a shooter. And he said, what if we did a documentary on the turtles? And I first said, no way. But then I was like, oh shit, we can combine all these things, you know, tech, the internet, these filmmaking techniques, this way of thinking about education, this way of incorporating fan culture, like really early on, and took all these things. And that's exactly when Favreau is making Iron Man 1. So Disney is coming into this IP exploitation wave, divining, building, creating it. And we're doing our small, tiny, dumb, small town version of the same thing. And Peter and Kevin weren't together at the time. They were separated, but we dealt with them each separately. And they agreed with us and literally physically told me to my face, your approach is interesting. It doesn't sound like a fan. They're used to fans approaching them, right? Like fans would want, like fans usually, no offense to fans. I get it. I'm a fan, but they want attention. They want to say what they like. They want to see their interests reflected. You know what I mean? It's almost like you're saying to Kevin Eastman, say the thing that you say. I want you to tell me the thing that you say, but it's this one's mine. You know what I mean? And we weren't doing that. And they trusted us. And so we incorporated all these principles I'm going on at great length about into the Turtles. And when we made Turtle Power, it took a long time, but Paramount was at a moment where they didn't know what they had 100%, I think it's fair to say. And they saw what we had, and they saw this process that we were doing that they had to start doing or look at in a different way that Disney was doing. Like all these things were happening right in that moment. And we just lucked in. And it was really irrepeatable in a sense that you couldn't do it again. And this doc, the fact that we're going to Kickstarter with this one reflects that it's irrepeatable. Companies don't do the same things now that they did then. And that's why we're going to Kickstarter. Like it's just so much harder to get a company to look at these documentaries the same way because of shows like The Toys That Made Us, which no knock on that show or that series. It kind of makes fun of the people. And that didn't make Kevin, I can speak for them in this regard. You can find it online. Didn't make them feel good. They didn't like how they were presented. Whereas when we approached it, we did it with respect and tried to elevate all the people involved, every person involved, right? In He-Man, there are some people that say, I did this and I did that. And we presented their opinions without judging, without choosing a side, without saying someone's not right and someone's, not wrong. We didn't do that. We just let these things be what they are, show the best elements of them, and then highlight what we think are the most interesting or the richest parts of those. Like with the Dark Crystal documentary we did, you don't really get to see under the rostrums and see how puppeteering is done. And when you see it, it's like, holy shit, like this is crazy, right? So there's just these elements that become so absorbing, you can't not kind of dive in. That's a really long answer, Boris. I'm sorry.
That's fantastic.
I love it. No, I love it because you literally went in every direction that I was going to go in to get to Turtle Power, the definitive history of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which was the original documentary. As you mentioned, released by Paramount. You can find it on iTunes and a bunch of other formats out there. But I loved it. I really did enjoy that. And it was so well done. And like you said, it just presented things there. It was very informative. And I really want to check out the Dark Crystal documentary. That
I have to.
One that it's something that I never really got too much into, but
no,
I know I was going to say,
me
Phil,
neither.
That's right up your alley.
Yeah, it's right up mine.
Oh, you're a Dark Crystal guy?
Yeah. I've watched all the Age of Resistance. I've read the books. I have the comics. You
saw Age of Resistance, and it didn't push you to the documentary?
Well, the documentary on Age of Resistance on Netflix, yes.
Yeah.
Is that yours?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well done.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that so much.
You did see it, so it did push you to it.
It did push me to it. And I ate it up like you wouldn't believe. I've gone back and watched it like 4 or 5 times. Like same as Turtle Power. I've watched it a few times as well. And that was before knowing any of this was coming up. It was just more so the analysis of pop culture was exactly what I identified with in the breakdowns of that show, because it didn't try to lean an opinion. It tried to just tell the story from all the people involved. It didn't give, you know what I mean? Exactly what you were saying.
Yeah.
And that's what I really appreciated, because when I've watched the documentaries, unfortunately, it's not a slam against the Toys That Made Us and stuff.
No.
Those are all nostalgic popsicles to me. Those are all just nostalgia lures, and they're just designed to hook you and keep you on. Whereas a real documentary informs, right? And you're gonna come out with your own opinion, maybe one of the people's opinions. I don't know. You're just going to either become more of a fan of something, or you're just going to take the enjoyment out of it and just know that that was the story. Like, you know the story a little bit better, but there's probably a little bit more.
Well, the thing with Turtle Power was I think we had 85 interviews in the can. It took us 4 years. And so, like, I don't even know how many hours of footage. Not 100, more than 100. It gets madness because Peter and Kevin shared their archives with us, right? And so we were making that documentary, and in the sort of the process of getting into negotiations with Paramount, there was stuff they did not want us to cover. You don't want to say anybody's names, but there were some people at Viacom, when they bought Turtles from Peter Laird, they didn't 100% know what they got, right? It wasn't something that everybody was like, oh yeah, Turtles, and that means this and that. So they were protective. They were starting a show at Nickelodeon at the time, and there was a side of Viacom that were running the franchise in a way that was protective, and we were seen as intruders. And they didn't like it that we might be able to have an impact on that Nickelodeon show. So we started the doc. We had all these archives. We had all this material. And Peter and Kevin were not together at the time. They were not friendly per se. They had communicated very little. They'd had a rather acrimonious falling out years earlier. And so working in between in this way, it meant that we had a little bit more than we actually knew that we had, in a sense. And so when I approached people at Viacom, they're like, we can't stop you, but we're not going to let you in to see what's going on at Nickelodeon. So the thing that I'm trying to point out to you here is, with all that material, we looked at it and said, the really important things to focus on here are firsts.
Yeah.
The creation, the comics, the first animated show, the Fred Wolf, the first movie. And really, those firsts set the tone for the Playmates toys. That's how it exploded, and that's kind of where we stop. We kind of go that way. And we ended the doc in a different way than it ends now. As we're going through the making and the selling and an enormously complicated, impossible process. If that was a podcast, you would think I was lying. I would say things to you that you would say, there's no way that's true. And it's true. And we get to a point where the movie, this is impossible, but it's real. The movie's done and submitted. It's at Paramount on the lot in tech specs, or it's called quality assurance, QA, getting the tech specs assessed. And we're uploading pieces that you have to put in, delivering this and that. And we go and shoot during this exact time when the movie is being delivered. We shoot Peter and Kevin getting back together for the first time in decades. And that's how the movie ends now. We made a new ending and changed the movie and changed it to tech specs. So we got friendly with the tech specs people at Paramount. The people at Paramount are like, okay, well, we'll slip it in. We slipped it in. And we have this thing happen. And we're like, God damn, if only, that would change the movie, right? We could do a whole other movie. So freeze that. We go to Canada Fan Expo that year, 2014. Movie's very successful. What I mean by that is, to us, it's good. We think it's excellent. It becomes popular very quickly. The Michael Bay movie is not doing great at first. It's getting some good reviews and some negative reviews. I do some pressers where they say to me, you kind of go out and talk about your movie, and it will sort of be press for the Michael Bay movie. And you can talk about that movie if you want, but no one told me to do it. But I did. I said, I saw it. I like these things. And here's what I think about the Turtles. You can transmute them into anything. They apply to lots of different people's interests. They're not black. They're not white. They're green. They're not young. They're not old. They're turtles. They're not humans, right? There's all these things that make easy attachment points for different audiences. And as we're doing this thing at Canada Fan Expo, we're showing our movie. There's a woman from Nickelodeon there, and she comes up to me and she says, we're going to do a giveaway. I got a bunch of stuff here, the new line of toys and that. And then she's like kind of irritated. And she says, why didn't you cover any of our stuff? And I said, well, we weren't allowed. And she's like, what? So I told her the truth, which I can't tell you, which is people's names. And she's like, oh my God, well, let's try and make this work. So for a year and a half, she and I have tried to figure out how to do a second doc. So the one that this Kickstarter is, I mean, I have it all up in front of me on these screens. That movie was built because so many people in Turtles are like, well, why didn't you cover this? Why didn't you cover that? How did you miss this? How did you miss that? It's like, shit, dude, we have it all. We just can't show it. So we started reshooting, and Nickelodeon, Phil, I mean, they didn't just let us in. They kicked the doors open and said, you can work in this room. You can go anywhere. You can look at anything. No holds barred. Ciro Nielli, who's running the show, Brandon Auman, who's running the show, those guys like welcomed us to their homes. We shot their personal, like, wow. Couldn't have been more embedded. And I just thought, oh shit, Nickelodeon's going to buy this now, and then we'll have a second doc. Yeah. And as we go further into this, it's right around the time that Netflix is exploding, right? And so many people are working at Netflix and moving from companies that are established to Netflix, because Netflix is the hot sister, right? So the people that we dealt with at Paramount just before they went to Netflix were saying to me stuff like, when's your doc going to be done? Like, how much do you think you want for it? And I wasn't going $25 million, maybe 1,000 million, 150,000 trillion. I was just saying numbers that were like what we had arranged. And they're like, I don't know. We're in flux. And they had started Rise. Like, we were there as Ciro's is being done, and Rise is coming up with Ant and Andy. It's just growing, and we are covering that. And they didn't have as much faith in the franchise. Things are changing. People are moving to Netflix. Boom, it all fell apart. Nobody made an offer. None of the people we worked with were around. Oh, man. And then COVID. And
COVID hit.
And then look what happened to Paramount since 2020, right? Like, if you think about Paramount now, the Skydance buys with a big capital bump from another company, but they buy Paramount. Paramount was in a state of flux, and they weren't really wanting to spend money on stuff. So we pitched Turtles and pitched Turtles and pitched Turtles. Oh, so many times. Had Adam F. Goldberg pitching Turtles with us. Like, he's someone we work with, and creator of the Goldbergs, if you know that show. Yeah. Yep. And even with Adam leaning on the scale, we just couldn't sell it. So one day we just said, this is not what you asked me, but one day we said, we have to get this out. We have to show this material, and we'll just make this Kickstarter to make some 4 or 5 hour cut that just has it all. And it's been on our hard drives, dude. It's so frustrating.
I can only imagine.
I can imagine. And yet you're stealing my thunder, because literally every question that I had lined up, you're just getting into naturally, which I absolutely
He knows what
love.
he's doing.
One thing I do want to mention is we can have a whole conversation an episode based on what is happening to the WB Discoveries, the Viacoms, and everything. And right now is a very interesting time. Look at WB Discovery and their $10 billion write-off last week.
It's so frustrating. It's so frustrating.
Yeah.
So years ago.
So 10 years. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I had just by way of my tiny little corner on the pimple on the back of a bug on the butt of Hollywood, I had a meeting with someone at the WB in an area where they have a lot of stuff happening at the time. And I pitched the kind of stuff we do, which is, in effect, if you wanted to use business terms, it's IP support, right? Like what we did with Dark Crystal Age of Resistance is we talked to Lisa Henson and the Henson people. We talked to the Netflix people. We talked to Louis Leterrier, the director, and the Muppets, the Muppeteers.
Yep.
The puppet people. I called them the Muppeteers.
Becky Henderson.
They had the people who had. How do you know that? Oh, you know that. Yeah.
He knows this. He knows it.
And you know Warwick and all those people, right? Kevin Clash and like some of these people have been and Victor they've been doing puppet work forever. They're some of them.
Kevin Clash was on Labyrinth.
That's right. So when you're dealing with these people, you want to represent everybody in this very clear way. And I was saying sort of this kind of stuff to somebody at the WB. And this is not the only place this happens. So please don't think it's a WB. I had this meeting 20 times. But what they said was, in effect, like, we don't want to work that hard. And we kind of don't have to. That's what they said. Like, they don't have the same care for the franchise that the fans do, obviously, and that's fine. They don't have to. But they didn't have the same care over the franchise that I bet if you had gone back in time and you could catch Jim Henson, you would find a guy who is super passionate about what he's doing. If you go back and talk to Walt Disney, he might be a crazy old racist or something, but is he passionate about what he's doing? Yeah. He cares about the stuff that he's doing. If you talk to Lisa Henson, she cares. It's personal. Yeah. But then when you talk to some of these people at these big companies, they're like shareholders, right? Yeah. And carrying debt loads and responsibility to the biggest investment, whatever the shadow of the giant investment group or hedge fund. You know what I mean? There's just so many factors. And you don't have if you go in talking the way we would talk about a franchise, you look like an innocent. Well, you look like you're a child, right? Yeah. And you want to say, no, I understand the business, and they would be like, no, you don't.
No, you don't.
Yeah, from their end.
And it's funny that you even bring that up, because like as a fan, you always saw this with DC movies, right? Where it was the business taking over as opposed to the fans actually doing things. If you don't talk the business, it's cool that you know these characters, but you can't translate that into dollars and cents. And that's what I see a lot happen with these big companies.
I think what you're seeing, Boris, is like if you went to think about James Wan, Aquaman, right? Sorry. And James Wan did Aquaman, and he did those horror movies that were The Conjuring. Did he do? Anyway, his company, he was a horror guy, and he went into Aquaman. And I did have a meeting there about Aquaman at the time. And I think at the time, there was DC Universe was brewing. They cared about the franchise. They cared about DC. People at DC Universe cared about DC. But when you go up, you're battling all these different sides. It's not just that they didn't care. There's too many fights that have to happen. And, I'm not going to say any names, but I know some people who were like banging their heads against the wall, so frustrated. They cared so hard. James Wan, you think he doesn't care about what he's doing? He does. He's just struggling to make these things happen. And everybody at his company is like, how do we get there? How do we make this work? And you're just the death of 1,000 cuts, right? You're doing all this service that's outside of serving the story or the character or the fans, however you want to word it. And it's just the business realities. It's the same as people who are making cars right now, right?
Yeah. Well, you can even look
at
exactly
Jim Henson. Where it was.
Sorry, I was going to say, you can even look at Jim Henson in the history of how he had to manage it. He would be putting his own personal finances up.
Yeah.
To get the movies made like Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, and then was just
so relatable, Phil.
Yeah, and he had to make all of those back end deals to get the Muppets and everything like that because he just couldn't shop it around. Nobody wanted it, and it just frustrates me as a fan right now because you look at what Disney's doing with the Muppets and how they just don't get the product.
Oh.
And I'm like, how come you guys aren't talking to the fan bases? The fan bases still exist. Make a variety show that the Muppet Show was.
Phil,
instead of Muppets Now and all this other crap,
if you want to talk Muppets, you wouldn't believe how hard Adam F. and his group had to work to get that Muppet Mayhem series up.
Oh, that was a good one.
Yes, it was. But how much? I don't want to say too much. Let's just say this. If you looked at my hard drive and we opened one file, you'd see Muppet docs, all done for Disney, like all pitch, every conceivable Muppet thing you can imagine. And each case, Adam F. would be trying to drive this Muppets energy. And so he's saying the fans love it. This is big. It's good. It's important. And Disney would be like, just not sure about Muppets. And again, it's no fault. You can't point at someone and go, it's your fault. You don't get it. It's just all these factors conspire. And when you have the pure heart to look at, Jim Henson and Brian Froud out in Dartmoor, like looking for fairies by the river. Literally, we went to Brian Froud's house and he told us that's where they look for fairies. That's not the same as a business person sitting, worrying about their mortgage at Brentwood, or it's just a different universe now. And those people have different concerns, and we have to understand that.
I will say the Muppets reboot with Jason Segel, that one actually made me smile.
He cares. It's personal.
Yeah,
it's
because
personal.
you could tell he was invested. Right. And, you just have to look at Forgetting Sarah Marshall and things like that. And that Jason Segel loves the puppeteering and the Muppeteering and all that kind of stuff. And when you see that energy in it, that's the payoff. When you don't see the energy in it, it's the sequel.
Well,
right.
When, I know this is not necessarily, we can talk about anything in this, but when you see Louis Leterrier directing the Dark Crystal Muppets and you see what the puppeteers are going through, and you see how much, Lisa Henson is sitting there looking at every single detail of these incredible creations. Like, just, you realize there is nothing that isn't designed. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Every single thing, right down, like passion to the centimeter.
Just the palace. You never even got to see that in the movie.
No,
and
it's
I'm
crazy.
just thinking, like, where the heck is this set? Like, I hope they don't destroy it, right? Because I know it's all styrofoam, and your documentary was great about how it was all created and everything, but every location was so believable. And then on top of it, like that meal with the Skeksis and just every detail, like
it's care.
I loved the movie, but that show was so much more illuminated and so much more detailed to me, because as a kid watching that in the theater, I was scared. And and it was that pop culture age where we weren't able to consume it until it came out on DVD, right? Like until it, VHS, that type of thing. And you were able to endear it to yourself and make that cult classic, right? The same way that you did with Labyrinth, because you just went and saw David Bowie in a weird outfit and his package was there and he sang songs and they were intriguing to me. But I just didn't know how to relate to it because there was also scary stuff, right?
Yeah.
There was also so much like horror element mixed in with the fantasy. But it wasn't until I got to rewatch it and find out that there's an audience that actually laughs about the scary stuff and enjoys it for what it is, and the absurdity and just the Monty Python-esque and everything about that, right? And I just found that with Age of Resistance, it was a breath of fresh air. And I was so disappointed with season 2 not being greenlit.
It was a very expensive show. I get it from a business perspective. And to answer your question, it was shot and built in an old kettle factory outside of a town called Slough, England.
Wow.
If you watch The Office, that's Slough, where that takes place. And so this abandoned kettle factory was enormous. And they had people in there, tradespeople that were like skilled thatchers of roofs. And it was jaw-dropping to see those sets. And I mean, again, we can't show all this footage, but there are times when you'd be way up high on something shooting down and you would think, how, like, there's nothing that wasn't built. You can't go buy a prop. Every single thing is designed and made by hand by somebody. It's madness. And that's, again, if you remember what we were talking about, passion, that it's personal, it's important, it's meaningful. And, George Lucas's Star Wars is George Lucas's Star Wars. And when Irving Kershner comes in, he's working in George Lucas's Star Wars. And you fast forward, and the ones that people don't like, again, I don't have a dog in the fight. I could watch anything and like it or not based on whatever. I don't, you know what I mean? I don't care what's woke or what's not. It doesn't affect me at all in my takes. But when I see that, I think, nobody's going to get the George Lucas Star Wars that they want. They're going to get some other version. And if they're looking for that personal touch, it's kind of gone. Like you watch a George Miller movie, you watch the Mad Max movies, you watch Fury Road. That's personal. You watch Furiosa. That's him. You feel him in that movie. And it's hard to do that in these big corporate structures, I think.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's the problem.
Yeah, and you can even look at, I think there was a documentary about Lucasfilm spanning the years, and it's on Disney, ironically. It's a 4-episode thing or something.
Yeah.
And it's all about how they used to all just kind of live in a garage.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it was like, well, we hung out here and we drank together and we played games together and we goofed off on Friday afternoons. And then we worked all weekend to get this shot done because George said it needed to be done for this edit. And that's the kind of family atmosphere and the camaraderie that I think it's difficult to get in this day and age.
Funny thing you mentioned, Phil, that's if you ask, we had a chat with Peter and Kevin a couple of weeks ago, which I think we recorded. So that'll be out there. I shouldn't say I know we recorded it, but I mean, I think the part that I'm referring to, I don't know if it will be in the video or not, but Peter and Kevin both remember, and so do all the old Mirage artists and writers they worked with and staff of all sorts. They remember the fun. They remember squirt gun fights and picnics and, parties on the shore. Like that's the stuff that's the most meaningful for them. And it's funny, the things that you would think that would be like the most meaningful, like, oh my God, we got our first box of cereal. Those things kind of fade, right? Like all the successes pile up, but what never piles up again is that feeling of personal engagement and meaning that you get creating in that space. And I just don't know, in a culture like when we started, we talked about how hard it was to get things. Now it's so easy to get things, and I'm not saying like an old man, oh, it's better in my day, you should have been there when you had a gum wrapper and you were damn lucky to enjoy it. But the idea that there's so much that can be done and so much corporate structure and so much money is at stake, it just seems to reduce the stakes, or even the enjoyment comes down a little bit somehow for me.
I'm just curious. What's your take on like YouTube and how its role in pop culture and how it impacts your industry?
It first of all, for me, it's ubiquitous. Like YouTube is a huge part of how I see the world. I'm a person who I can't watch, and I shouldn't even act like I know anything about TikTok. I can't deal with algorithm. So I don't like social media because I can't stand algorithm. So I started being interested in YouTube immediately. And in fact, hilarious, predicted YouTube in the early 90s and actually did talks about it. Like I knew what would happen. Just the way that things went, I just knew I would always call it like there'll be a video library online. That's what I would think would happen. And my stupid childish brain at the time, being in my early and mid 20s, I would think it would be like you would go and select what you want and you would see it. And for me, it would be something like music videos that were on once and I never saw again. You know what I mean? That's what I thought it would be, like the library that never went away. And I would always be searching. So to me, that's good. Like the YouTube that I can go and find the David Bowie on Old Grey Whistle Test, or the band Japan on Old Grey Whistle Test, or, whatever, that kind of archive stuff, to me, very important. What I don't like is how the algorithm grabs stuff and starts shoving it in your face.
Yep.
And I also don't like, years ago, I had a meeting at Maker. This will be illustrative. And there was a guy there who he was interested in. I work with do you remember a YouTuber named Patrick Boivin? He was a YouTube filmmaker that did stop motion animation, Montreal director. He did Iron Baby and Dragon Baby.
It sounds familiar. It really does sound familiar.
He did AT Afternoon. Do you remember when he had a little AT running around?
Yes.
Like a dog. Yeah. So I'm his writing partner. I work with him. And he was popular on YouTube before they changed their metrics and algorithm. They restructured it. And then he died on YouTube. It's not the same. And around that time, we were having these meetings at Maker. And what was happening was the influencer culture was coming up, and they were feeling their power and they were flexing, but they didn't know about story, right? Like, does Jake Paul know about story? Does Casey Neistat know about story? Maybe when he started, he didn't. Maybe he does now, like Mr. Beast, Jimmy. Did Jimmy know about story? No, it was different. It was stunty. You know what I mean? There was a lot of reduction of the things that took time and were friction built that would force you to have to get a certain set of skills in a certain direction. Those didn't last as much as a different type of skill set. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that set of skills, which I'm not knocking, what Mr. Beast did, it is what it is. It's successful and it's the right thing. And I'm me and he's him, and you see the difference between us. But for me, it's not as appealing. I like the other direction.
Yeah.
The people who are crafting stuff and doing something. Like even this conversation, I would find this more appealing for my interests, because we're not doing anything, you know what I mean? Stunts.
Yeah.
There's no, if you come here and listen to this, it rewards your patience because you care about the subject matter. And that's what I like. So that's a long way of saying I like and I hate YouTube.
Yeah.
Because I just want to be able to go, you know, at any given time, I want to look for this and it's easy to find.
Mm-hmm.
The algorithm isn't shoving something in my face. Like, I'm interested in this. This is crazy, but US politics is like a great big Borg that's eating everything right now, right?
Yeah.
And it's intruding in everything that we do. And if you click on one thing to see one thing, it's everything.
Yeah.
And that's what I object to. So my algorithm,
I just use my subscription list, and I just ignore my algorithm feeds, because I just curtail it. Once I see someone doing stunts and stuff, I take them out, but I'll just basically go to created content like Adam Savage and stuff like that, just so I can learn. How is this done?
What you just said, it's the learn part. Like, I like the learn part because I'm old, and I don't like even if you played World of Warcraft, there's the way to play World of Warcraft and enjoy that content would be like informative, kind of deep dive into lore or whatever, right? There are choices, but then there's just like the trend of the day or like easy content that just churns out. I'm really frustrated about that. And as a filmmaker, I don't have any interest nor skill in generating YouTube content, like in a way that, you know, there's a retro game guy. I totally dropped his name right now, but we've had, I think his name is, doesn't matter. We've had meetings with him and chatted with him about what he does, because we're curious, and it's work. Like, it's not even filmmaking. It's a whole separate bunch of work, and you have to be good at that work. Rerez, that's his name. He's a retro gamer named Rerez.
Yeah.
And he's from Cambridge, and he's really good, and he has a big audience. And when you hear the work he has to do, it's just not something that I have no ability or skill, and it's not about being a good filmmaker. So I can't.
Yep. Exactly. It's been 10 years since the last one, and here we are, TMNT Evolution, Mutation, and Reboot. It's on Kickstarter. We know why it's on Kickstarter now, but talk to me about this new documentary.
I'm realizing you guys might have to turn the tap off on my... what we've got is a Kickstarter coming out in a way that is going to answer some of the complaints about the first movie. How come you didn't cover this? How come you didn't cover that? If you really had all this footage, you would show that. You know what I mean? These things, you cannot go to the industry and say, we have a multi-hour documentary. They're not interested. I know you're going to say, what about Camp Crystal Lake? What about the Robotech or the RoboCop documentary? Those are special and they do emerge. But if you told somebody that you were going to do a 3-part, 4-hour documentary series on turtles, they would say, I can't sell it. I can't place it anywhere. They would want 88 minutes. And by the way, I'm not complaining about this. I totally get it. Whatever sells is what you have to sell, right? There's no chalk flavored gum for a reason. So this, or maybe there should be. So this documentary, it's sitting on our hard drives for years, and we're not doing anything with it. And we have some really amazing stuff. Like we have Peter and Kevin talking in a way that is the opposite of some of the facts that are given out in other documentaries. And I'm not bitter about the facts, but I do think we have to get this out. These guys aren't getting younger. There's going to be a day when Peter's retired from public appearances. There's going to be a day when Kevin says he's done, and we have their words and their voices in a way that they think is meaningful. And I want to get that out to the world, and not just from a business perspective. Like, I'm not getting any younger either. I don't want to be a 75-year-old man with trying to sell a documentary I made 25 years ago or whatever. I'd like this to come out so people can see it and go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you have the Kickstarter starting sometime in August. What's your time frame for the release?
Well, it is 2024, and the Turtles came out in 1984. So we would like fans who care about Turtles to come and follow the Kickstarter. It's going to be sometime in the end of August, early part of September. We don't know exactly, because we're trying to build up the anticipation, excitement, so that the algorithm can work with us, and get those fans who know it's the 40th anniversary and care about it to see it before the end of the year, so that in 2025 we can come out with something special. And that's the book, and it's the movie, and it's the extended stuff, and we will have a list of material. I'm scrolling through here that it's insane. Like, listen to some of this. Original voice cast reunion, Peter Laird showing us how he did the original duo shed demonstration, Kevin Eastman drawing demonstration, the Dover walk and talk as they talk about their old times together. We have the earliest pitch document where they're looking at the first turtle toys, all this great stuff. We have the only behind the scenes footage from the 1990 movie that's so beloved, on and on and on. And if we don't put it out, I don't know where, if I got hit by a bus right now, where's this going to go? Isaac would put it out. Partner Mark would put it out. Those guys would put it out. But if we were all three together and got hit by a bus, those hard drives get thrown in a dumpster and nobody knows what's on them. Like, that's just not something.
Don't get in the same elevator.
We've been riding different elevators the whole time.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right. So if I was to sign up for the Kickstarter and donate, what am I looking to get? Because Kickstarter is all about the kickbacks.
Oh, dude. It's just crazy stuff. I don't want to say exactly, because we're changing it as we go, but we're making a book, a prestige coffee table book. We've got action figures that are made from prototypes that were never done. We've got action figures that weren't ever utilized, and we're building them. We have them. I wish I could show you the shot. These are things that in the very early meetings, Kevin and Peter were presented with these drawings that a guy named John Handy at Playmates did. And he was like, here's a guy who has a snot gun. He's like a commando that shoots snot out of a snot gun that literally attaches to his nose. And these kinds of things that were basically kiboshed by Peter. But these things were in design mode, and we got the designs from the original designers and we built them. So we have those. We have action figures of Peter and Kevin of the era on card backs that look like Playmates card backs. And we're building Peter and Kevin action figures that look pretty rad. And again, I don't know if I can show them yet, because I'm not sure we're allowed to do that, but they look like that right there. And they're like turtle characters, and they've got like stuff on sprues, and it's very cool. And it's Kevin and Peter 1984 style from the cool material that we have from our archives. Yeah. That's and awesome. Just tons of stuff like that. Not cheap, stupid tchotchkes. This will be really, truly unparalleled material that you won't get anywhere else. By the way, we can't sell this stuff, and we won't. Like, these aren't things that we're even allowed to sell. These are things that you can get as a gift for backing the Kickstarter. But these aren't things that we're selling. No one can sell them. They're not.
Yeah, they'll be true collectibles.
Yeah, they are
like hard to find, hard to get.
Hard. Yeah, very hard.
There you go. Kickstarter, TMNT Evolution, Mutation, and Reboot. If you want this made, you better get to donating. Sign up now. You can get all the notifications on the launch. Randall, I hope you can come back in the middle of the campaign so that we can talk more about what's going on, what you're going to give, and whatnot. And we'd love to do more deep dives in pop culture.
Yeah. I just hope that this was a 5-hour show, right?
It could be. It could be.
What day is it? Yeah, listen, as you can tell, I can go on too long about this because we're just
I love it.
so in it.
Love it.
Anyway, I would love to come back again. I would love to talk to you guys again. And I just wish, it's too bad Isaac's not here because you can go deep with him. And if Kurt was here, you could go deep on wrestling with him. He's the guy that edits Kurt Lubb edits Territories, and you could do the wrestling thing. There's a lot of juicy pop culture stuff going on at the Definitive Shop. That's for sure.
Yep, I love it. Awesome. I love it. And I do have something to show you before we go. And I did message Danny in the middle of the show, and I'm going to put this up right now. And he says he was the first person to ever call me Granny Danger.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
There you go.
Goodness.
There you go.
So that, I feel, Danny, by the way, enormously talented, and was such a sweet kid to teach. If you met him when he was a little high school boy, just the nicest, sweetest, kindest boy. And now he's all grown up and everybody loves him, and he's in the culture so big on his own, isn't he?
Yeah, he's doing great. He's doing a lot of parties with his Sharpie art. I actually work very closely with him. I do a lot of his footage and videos. I'm like his filmographer. Nice. Also, I do all the producing for his brother-in-law. So yeah, it's a small world.
Isn't it? Oh, he's a great guy. I'm glad to know that I'm probably the only person you've ever met who spoonerizes everything. Like switches the letters around for everything. That's how I came up with.
I love it.
Danny Granger.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
All right, Randall. Thank you so much for joining us again. We're gonna have you back. We can talk about so much. Like this is, I loved every second of this, and I just love that like you took my notes and it's like you read them before I even got the chance to talk about anything. I loved it.
Just wind him up and watch him go. Sadly, isn't it?
That's, for me, those are my favorite interviews.
Those are the good ones.
The less I talk, the better.
Well, I don't know. But
and I get to watch Age of Resistance again, so hey.
It's true.
You just changed all the context for it for me.
Right? There you go. And Phil, you know what it's time for.
All right. You can track us down on Instagram, X, or Twitter, whatever we want to call it this week. YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, at It's Canon Podcast. You can email us with at itscanonpodcast.com. Don't kill me. I haven't done this in a long time. And you can basically find a podcast wherever you found this one. Keep on listening, and thank you for your time this week.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Randall. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
TMNT Evolution, Mutation, and Reboot Kickstarter. It'll be on the show notes. You'll be able to follow it. We're going to be pumping this out each and every single week until Randall comes back and get to talk about it a little more. You got a backer in me, that's for sure. We're going to be... Yeah, we're going to be talking so much about this. And again, it's the It's Canon Podcast, the show where we talk about all things comic books, toys, photography, Lego, anything you want. We talk about it here. And Phil, you know what the best part of it all is?
Apparently, someone told me it's all in canon.
There you go. It is all in canon. Thank you so much. And until next time, stay tranquilo.